Hi, today I want to talk with you about how does Despia work? Now, this is a question that we have been getting a lot of times, and I want to do a deep dive with you on how it actually works, how it renders your application, and why not being 100% native is completely fine. Let's take a look at that. So the question of the day is, how does Despia work? And how it works is how it makes all the difference in, other solutions out there and Despia. Now, the main difference with Despia is that it provides you a build tool to build your application, meaning you do not have to open Xcode, you do not have to open Android Studio and configure some files and build it yourself, right? You can just go into a visual editor where you can import your web application URL, meaning you can go and put your WeWeb application in there. You can take your Nordcraft application. You can take your Vue.js application, host it on Vercel or Netlify or Cloudflare, whatever you want. As long as it has a URL, you can put that into Despia, and Despia will then render that with its runtime as a mobile application, as a native mobile application. Now, how native it is something that we will be taking a look later in this video. So we have this build tool, and the cool thing about that is you actually do not need to have a Mac computer or any kind of computer. You can do this even from an iPad because we run this M2 Mac Mini for you. So we have those resources available, meaning when you want to build your application, it's one click, you set and forget, you go out doing a walk with the dog or get yourself some coffee, and within 20 to 30 minutes your application will be successfully built and already sent as a draft to the App Store. So we do handle all that build process for you. Now, what does it build? It builds an application with the Despia runtime. Now, how does the runtime work and how does that come together? So the runtime has a few components to it that make it important. The first component is the GPU powered rendering engine. And what's that? So essentially it renders HTML, CSS, oh my god. It renders HTML, CSS, not CCS. It renders HTML, CSS, and JavaScript via hardware acceleration. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, what it is, and I don't like saying the word because it has a very bad reputation in the development community, but what it is a web view. Now, the moment I say web view, I'm probably losing half of your attention, but hear me out. The difference between Despia and a normal web view application, even Capacitor, is Despia has all those plugins integrated, meaning it gives you access to almost every native SDK that you could ever imagine you would need to use in your application, from native contact access to smart widgets to app clips to biometric verification to literally everything. Installing eSIM cards. Like, you can do everything, as crazy as it sounds, inside of Despia. You can even do share targets, getting content from other apps into your app. It's really amazing what you can do with it. We give you access to that pre-built, so it exposes this, as you can see here, via window.despia, which gives you an easy JavaScript access to trigger native functionality. So you don't have to install native plugins like you would be doing in Capacitor or in Flutterflow or Flutter, right? You can just use code that you write in your existing web application that talks to window.despia. For example, window.despia equals heavy haptic, and then you write this as a URL scheme, like heavy haptic : / and that writes that to the Despia application. It triggers kind of like a location change, which will be intercepted because it is kind of like a deep link that it calls, and then your phone will vibrate. So it's pretty cool how you can access those native functionalities within your existing JavaScript application code base or no code base, because you can easily also integrate this in any web application no code builder out there. Now, coming back to the WebView part, normally when we talk about a WebView application, those are the ones that have this bad reputation of being laggy, of being an absolute terrible experience. What we're talking about is something like PWA Builder, which gives you literally more icon files than native files. It gives you a WebView file and an app delegate, and then it gives you a plist, right? It gives you like 4 files or so. And then it gives you a folder with 25 or 20 app icons. So the moment you see that you have more app icons than actually native files, you know something is going wrong, because a lot of people have been trying to get their shitty website with those kinds of solution onto the App Store. And this is why Apple doesn't like WebView applications. And this is why there are rejections. They don't like people putting their website, their shitty web application on the App Store. Apple does not have any vendetta against the WebView. They invented it. They improved it with the WK WebView. They have a problem with people using it for the wrong reasons and not building a mobile application, cutting corners. Now, Despia is not cutting corners. We actually took this WebView engine that Apple has built and also is available on Android, and we've been tuning it like crazy because we have been enabling hardware acceleration into that WebView, which gives you GPU-powered rendering. That's why we call it GPU-powered rendering engine. You can see we do everything we can to avoid the word WebView because it does have this bad reputation, and Despia has nothing to do with all the other WebView wrappers that you can find out there. It's a framework, and it compares very closely to how Flutterflow works and render stuff, but I'll go back into that. Now, we have this GPU-powered rendering engine, and you actually get smooth performance up to 60 frames per second, which is pretty cool. So we have about 60 frames per second on a normal phone. If your phone is in low power mode, it will probably go down to 30 to 40, depending on if you're using Android or iOS. iOS likes to just get it down to 30 because they do want to get the most out of it, but unless you're showing 5,000 images being animated across the screen, you don't necessarily feel that much of a difference when they are in low power mode. But also they're at 10% battery. They'll be thankful that you're saving some power on their phone and they can do their last calls and all that, right? So you don't have to worry about performance when it comes to Despia. You get 60 frames per second performance, which is pretty smooth. Now, again, Flutterflow can give you up to 120, but 60 frames per second is pretty good for most applications, considering that most displays only support 60 frames per second. And the difference from 60 frames per second to 120 frames per second is really only significant to people who use your application, who are developers or tech geeks, right? The average user will not feel a difference in that. So you do have this amazing rendering engine. And the beautiful thing, because it does use the WebView, is you get a bunch of benefits the way we do it. Now, you can update your application in real time, and your application that's on the App Store or Google Play Store will update as well if you publish it to the main branch without having to get App Store approval. So let's say you want to change your paywall. You don't need App Store approval. You change it right now. In a minute, every user's application is updated with the new paywall. This is great for A/B testing. This is great for making sure that critical changes on the front end and on the back end can be fixed immediately without having to go through the app review process, where it can take up to a week for them to review your update, which could be critical, right? So you do get the best essentially from Expo and Code Push directly put into Despia, into one framework and one build tool and a distribution platform. So we're taking all the principles out there and putting all the best together, because the way we do this with the real-time over-the-air updates, that is very similar to Expo, that's very similar to Code Push, even though we have less limitations because we're using the WebView the way we're using it in an actually performant manner that actually feels snappy and nice. Now, with the WebView, one could argue saying, okay, the elements that you're rendering on the screen are not real native elements, and React Native, which is one of our competitor, we see ourselves as a competitor to Flutterflow and React Native, uses real native UI elements. Now, the difference is with React Native, everybody knows Flutterflow is more performant than React Native in most cases. And if you do a little ChatGPT search and you ask ChatGPT how much of the elements, how much percent of the elements in Flutter, not Flutterflow, Flutter, the no-code version would be Flutterflow, but Flutter is more performant than React Native. If you ask ChatGPT or Google that yourself, how much percent in Flutter of the elements are real native elements, you'll figure out that 0% of the elements are native elements. So Flutter itself does not have any native elements, but what it does with the Despia engine is it uses the GPU to draw almost like, it's not an SVG, but it draws lines almost like an SVG on the screen to render interfaces. It doesn't use native components for that. This is very similar to how Despia works. Despia uses also the GPU to render HTML markup in a canvas that Apple seems to call WebView, that we provide hardware acceleration, we provide a tuned version of that. This also uses the GPU, so it renders those native elements with the GPU, being more closer to Flutterflow than being actually closer to React Native, because it does utilize the GPU to render non-native elements in a native element, because the WebView or the Despia mainframe has to be native element for them to do something with it, right? It has to be around native elements, otherwise you wouldn't have an application, right? So there has to be some parts that are native. And actually Despia compiles down to 2,100 to 2,700 native files. So you're getting something out of it, you're getting a bunch out of it, and we take care of publishing and distributing that to the app stores and Google Play Store. So this is how the rendering part works. Now, how do we do the native functionality? Because this is what really makes Despia different from any other wrapper. I don't like the word wrapper and I don't like the word WebView, so I'm trying to avoid those words because they do have a bad reputation. But how does it compare to all the other stuff out there and even Flutterflow? It's pretty similar because Despia actually packages the native parts of it inside of the native code that it generates, right? So Despia compiles down to being a bunch of native code, and it includes a bunch of SDKs, dependencies, and native functionalities. So you have the native packages and dependencies. Those are part of the runtime, but they are not part of the way how Despia renders UI elements. So you have the SDKs that defines and imports native functionalities, native features like Face ID, biometric verification, haptic feedback, all those kinds of things, and it makes them accessible from the rendering engine. So we package the SDKs inside of here, and then the rendering engine can access them using window.despia, which is a simple JavaScript method that can be used by every framework, every no-code tool out there to run a simple one-line JavaScript snippet to get native data, to trigger native events, to write native data to the device, and all kinds of different things, making it super simple to access advanced native functionalities very efficient. And the nice thing is, we're working on those things. They're not published yet. It will take us a little bit probably to fine-tune this, but one thing that we're working on is offloading extensive tasks that run in the rendering engine to those SDKs, like we're already doing with biometric verification, but we can also apply this to AI. So saying you can do window.despia equals AI : / query parameter AI question. It will then take this request and it will not run the AI request locally in the rendering engine. It will then send this to the native part of the application using the native hardware resources from the device, and it will then generate a response with AI and inject that back as a JavaScript variable into the rendering engine, making it available to your web application and your web application code. So this is how it works. Now, we don't have the AI feature yet, but we're actively working on that. And this is kind of like how biometrics work, how haptic feedback works. And we're now trying to use this technology to offload extensive tasks so you don't have to call your backend for certain AI things. You can do them small things on the device itself, giving you all the powers inside of your web application that a native ecosystem would have. Now again, no ETA on the AI yet, but we are working on it and we're trying to architecture it into a way where it has the most device capabilities. So you do have the SDKs. Now we do have the core. The core is also very important. It defines the build phases and it defines some of the configurations that this Xcode or Android Studio project will need to have to be able to be built by the build tool that turns this, that kind of like turns this all together into a package that can be submitted to the app stores. It contains general configurations as well, like the status bar color and all those kinds of things. That's the core of the native part. That defines the native elements, how they behave, do you want swipe navigation or not. Then we have the targets. That's our latest addition to making this native framework even more complete, meaning you can have dynamic targets conditionally added into Despia, meaning let's say you want to include smart widgets, which we support, or you want to include app clips, or you want to include share targets, being able to share content from other applications into your native application, which those things I've not seen any visual framework that builds mobile application that supports those things out of the box without a plugin or some third-party community hack. We support those things natively out of the box. And this gives you access to something that's very cool because you can now conditionally add those dependencies into Despia, those packages, those configurations into Despia. They will have their own group IDs and their own bundle IDs, but they're modular, so you can add them if you want them, but if you don't want them and we keep adding them, Apple will reject your application because they're like, why do you have an empty widget? And why do you have an empty app clip, right? So you only want to include certain dependencies if you need them. And this is what the build tool actually does. So we have this framework that can take any dependency of those, any target of those, and then the build tool, based on your configuration in the Visual Despia editor, lets you enable or disable them. So you will only include the targets in the build application that are needed for your specific use case. So we have those conditional modular SDKs, those modular native targets in there, and that is a very big difference in how Despia actually compiles this together and how easy it makes it for you without having iOS development or Android development experience to do the most advanced things that an application can do in a very, very, very similar and beginner-friendly manner. So if you're serious about building great applications, and you're not afraid of the word webview because it only has a bad reputation if you use it in a bad way. If you use it the right way, there's nothing bad about using a webview because from all of those 2,100 files, 2 files are webview files. So there are not many webview files in Despia. It's just it's part of it. It's part of the whole framework. It's part of the whole experience. Most of it will be native files giving you all those exciting native features from Screen Shield, like protecting screen recording, to all kinds of other native dependencies and packages, widgets. You have it all in Despia. So don't be scared by the word WebView, even though we are using a WebView, but we do like calling it rendering engine. GPU-powered rendering engine, because that's what it is, right? It just uses some of the core functionalities of a web view, but it is definitely way beyond a simple web view application. It's, I would say, the most advanced web view application that you can ever build, and it compares pretty closely to Flutterflow's principles, even though it's not the same. Flutterflow obviously lets you do better animations because you have 120 frames per second available to you, but it's very close and it's a valid alternative that is definitely worth exploring. And if you already have a web application, or if you're already a web application developer, or you just like the flexibility of the web, because the web will definitely let you do more creative things inside of your application. This is why I invented Despia. This is why I got my team together to build this, because I'm a web application developer. I like the freedom that I get when I'm developing something in the web. I tried building mobile applications, I tried Flutterflow, I tried React Native, I tried all the things out there, and Flutter, and all AI things to build mobile applications recently as well. And what I don't like is that you don't have all this freedom that you would be having in the web when you're building a mobile application. And with Despia, my goal was to get this freedom of building a web application and this flexibility that you love when it comes to styling, when it comes to functionalities, into a native mobile application that can be distributed with the App Store, connect to the App Store, or with the Google Play console to the Google Play Store, while giving you a competitive edge when it comes to native features. And this is what we have created, and I can't wait to see all the exciting applications that you're building with this amazing new framework, build tool, and technology. This is how Despia works. I hope it was very informational, and I can't wait again to see all the exciting stuff that you will be building with it. And yeah, happy building. Take care.